right, everybody. Are we good? Welcome, everybody, to our monthly Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. We've been doing this for about 7, 8 years, and when we started, there was maybe 3 places around the country, and now there's about 40 around the world where people gather, and it's more like a social meeting of the minds from different disciplines, from arts and sciences, and to present the work, but really have it as a kind of food for thought so people can further socialize. So this particular laser is pretty fantastic because it's taking advantage of the moment, may I say. Joselyn Hu is working on a new piece, and she's here with her collaborators, and so we gave her the opportunity to try it out here, which is what we like the best. So in the gallery you see her work in progress about women's labor. And Christa Sommerer and Laurent Mignonneau are here in town, just opened an exhibition at the Beale Gallery of Art and Technology at UC Irvine, curated by David Famillion, good friend and collaborator as well. And we have such a window of opportunity because they're here just today and going off to Santa Barbara tomorrow and then back to Linz. So it's fantastic to have 2 people who have contributed so much to the field of media arts, art and science, and education to be here and to have that exhibition. Those of you out there who are watching, and I know a lot of my students are, blaze you to come here, you will come with me to that show. it's probably the first retrospective of your work here in the US, and you will see the breadth of it and how much it has influenced other artists. So with that, I would like to just start the show and introduce our first group.
Thank you, Victoria, for the invitation to speak at the Laser Talk today, and thank you for everyone here. And so this is women's labor. As Victoria said, it's a work in progress, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback at the end. So women's labor is a project that repurposes old domestic tools. At heart, the project is a feminist initiative to revalue traditional women's work through reimagining feminine technologies. Often kept away from the public eye, domestic tools belong inside the home where women belong. This exclusion from the public speaks to the larger inequality of esteeming art over craft work, the workforce over housework, and generally traditional masculine activity over feminine activity. In women's labor, domesticity is recast in a new light through the integration with new sound technology in an attempt to dismantle the split between public and private spheres.
So today, we're going to give you a little bit of our bios and our previous work and what brought us together to work on this women's labor, a little description of the project itself, a brief history of these new instruments for musical expression, and then a detailed technical description of the embedded iron, which you just experienced, and you sort of had the demo beforehand. We're not going to do a demo afterwards.
So just a little bit about myself. I'm an assistant professor of performance studies at the Herb Halpert School of Music here. I am trained as a pianist. I'm a historical keyboardist, and I also compose and theorize about music. And my interests are the intersection of these roles in new music, historical performance practice, gesture theory, and embodied cognition. And like now, I love to collaborate with and direct collaborations, performer-directed collaborations with other artists and technologists. So just a little bit about my previous work. So this is Synesthesia Playground from 2016. This was a collaboration that I directed between composers, visual artists, fashion designers, and software engineers, where I commissioned 6 new multimedia piano works to explore the idea of intersensoriality. So on the left, this is piano epidermis, which is a projection mapping onto the body of the piano, kind of imagining the piano having a skin that reacts to the sound of the music. And on the right is Biolux, a fiber optic jacket, which reacts to my heartbeat and sound frequencies as well. So this was premiered at Stony Brook and also sold out at Spectrum NYC, and it was actually also had its West Coast premiere here at UCLA in 2016. So this is one of the pieces that I composed called Shen for piano and mobile phones, in which the audience's mobile phones become makeshift musical instruments. So they have, so they improvise according to the instructions that they receive on their mobile phones, and it's really kind of like a communal experience of directed listening, whether it be like internal, like swallowing saliva, like tapping when you swallow saliva, and kind of like macroscopic and microscopic listening, directed outwards.
So I am Margaret Shadell, and on this project I am one of the commissioned composers and the UX designer. I'm an associate professor of music at Stony Brook University, and I'm a composer, a tone meister, so those are the people that in concerts make your stuff sound good, a cellist, so I came to music from a performer background and I still perform, a programmer, not as good as Matt, but a programmer nonetheless, and I say that I'm a reluctant author simply because I'm not a musicologist. Like Joselyn is trained and writes these beautiful sentences and incorporates philosophy. I sort of say, this is how the technology worked. Because I find that a lot of musicologists make these beautiful conclusions about something that is fundamentally incorrect. So I'm hoping that by writing about how things work, future musicologists can use my work to write pretty sentences about philosophy. I use Max MSP Jitter to create interactive environments. I'm the co-founder of www.arts.codes. I think another sort of fallacy around art and technology is that it's a new phenomenon. So in arts.codes, we sort of celebrate past of art and hope to advance the art form. And I collaborate with other artists, musicians, artists, dancers, and scientists. So one of the first projects that I did with machine learning was understanding bow articulations. So I was a cellist. I got this, actually helped work on the development of this. So if you know Keith McMillan Instruments, he's now doing more, like he has a soft step pedal board and some other interfaces, but he started with these bowings, and I had the bow, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna be able to do something different whether I do a down bow or an up bow. And I couldn't even program the computer to do something that simple, because if I smoothed out the data enough to understand it, it wasn't reactive enough. So I saw Rebecca Fiebrink give a presentation at a conference, and she was talking about this machine learning platform that she was developing called the Wekinator. And this was her doctoral thesis at Princeton. And using the Wekinator, I was actually able to train a computer to understand various articulations based on this K-bow. I also used Wekinator for a piece called After Apple Box, and it's using ammunition boxes I found in the attic after my father died. And basically, I train the computer to understand where and how people are tapping on the box. So the box becomes a musical instrument, and people fill these boxes with sounds of a loved one who has passed. And Joselyn was really interested in these ideas of what I called installformances. So these are a series of pieces which functions as installations with a virtuosic performance. So when you go and see a piano concert, you're not thinking about how a piano works. Oh, if it's down here, it's low, and up here, it's high, and this means loud, and oh, if they do something with their foot, suddenly the sound gets super smeary. So I had a series of pieces that had a component where people would look and interact with the installation, just like you did, and then understand that there was a virtuosic performance that could happen when someone practiced and really understood the instrument. And I think you all experienced that with what you just saw Joselyn do. She was getting sounds out of that system that no one was. And that's really exciting for me to show that these new instruments have a virtuosic trajectory.
I'm Matt. I'm the technical director on this project. I am finishing up my dissertation at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. I'm a guitarist and a composer, and more recently a music technologist. I began programming in MaximSP and ported over to Pure Data and processing for some visual effects. My primary research right now is developing instruments using embeddable Linux systems like the Raspberry Pi, the BeagleBone, boards of that nature. And I primarily collaborate with pre-existing code. I will occasionally be social when Meg forces me to. But I was brought onto this project due to my previous experience with embedded instruments, such as my dissertation project, which is titled Musical Chairs. There are 4 pieces of living room furniture, some of which have pressure-sensitive cushions that detect how you're leaning on them, coffee tables with capacitive keyboard interfaces, things of that nature.
So I want to talk about the stages of the project. So the first stage is the instrument creation, which you have just experienced the beginning of. In this stage, tools from both the recent past and the present will be repurposed to become musical instruments. These include the ironing board and the iron that you've just seen, an embroidery hoop and needle with smart fabric, and a mid-20th century wooden umbrella-style rotary dryer with wooden pegs and hangers. In the second stage, the public will interact with these domestic tool-turned instruments as installations, with the goal of altering the audience's perception of domestic activities that they, their family members, or their domestic workers perform in their everyday lives. Then, informed by the public installation, I'll compose rule-based compositions with these instruments for workshop participants. The participants will learn simple rules to perform the compositions and discuss their experience with respect to their views of domesticity. Inspired by sonic meditations written for the female ensemble by visionary feminist composer Pauline Oliveros, they will be asked to be mindful of both their own and each other's movements and sounds when performing various domestic gestures. These gestures will be meditations on domestic tasks. The group-oriented participation reminds participants of the traditionally communal and intergenerational nature of some of these tasks. For instance, washerwomen on the riverside, or grandmothers and mothers passing down crafting skills to granddaughters and daughters. Composers from stage 3 are invited to co-host and participate in these workshops. These are from stage 4, sorry. These workshops will be video documented. So this is stage 4. 3 women composers, Meg being the first one, will be commissioned to compose with these instruments in combination with historical instruments traditionally designated as female, such as the clavichord and the forte piano. And the final stage is the premiere of the works from stage 4, juxtaposed with underrepresented works by past women composers. A discussion panel with collaborators and experts will follow. So a little bit of background about the impetus for the project. So the traditional women's labor is largely unpaid and unacknowledged. Housework and child rearing are mandated as women's duty as wife or mother. It is true that the 20th century has seen the liberation of the role of women by their entering the workforce. The feminist agenda of breaking the workplace glass ceiling across traditionally male-dominated industries continues to be important. However, recent studies show that the continued devaluing of traditional feminine work contributes to pay inequality. The validation of traditionally feminine skill sets such as domestic tasks and their adoption by men are equally crucial in creating a gender-equal 21st century culture. The undervaluing of women's work is particularly prominent in the writing of history. Canonic histories concentrate on significant historical events that are steered almost exclusively by male figures, in a narrative defined by Western patriarchy. Private, domestic technologies in traditionally women's realm are often overlooked. The documentation of how the public engages with these installations in the workshops alludes to a historian's archival work, challenging Western patriarchal perspectives of technologies that are noteworthy. The artistic composition around these domestic technologies further empowers them. The inclusion of traditional women's labor into a history acknowledging women's slighted accomplishments of little perceived public value on their own terms. Moreover, in a city with clear social-economic divide, domestic activities in affluent households are often exclusively done by female household workers from poorer families. Women's labor democratizes domestic activities through public installations and workshops. By commissioning women composers, women's labor doubly addresses the gender inequality that exists in the music field today. In this project, people from all walks of life, not only women, engage hands-on with these domestic objects, disrupting the audience's preconceived notions about domestic tasks, beckoning them to reflect upon their own domestic lives. So another inspiration of the project is this concept of feminine instruments. The policing of women to certain types of activities extends to musical culture up until the 19th century, where only particular musical instruments were permissible for female musicians. Such gendering of instruments greatly hindered women from participating in public musical life. Only musical instruments that were deemed respectable for women, such as keyboard instruments, lute, harp, and the partitures de viol, were allowed to be played only inside the household, nurturing their marriageability. A notorious example is the frowning upon of women violinists, which was seen as a masculine activity. Reviews of violinists in the 1800s are telling of the attitudes of the time. So this is Madame Gazzereau, and this is a review of her performance. At the end of the second part, Madame Gazzereau from Paris performs for the first time in England a concerto on the violin with great ability. The ear, however, was more gratified than the eye by this lady's masculine effort. And another, I must confess that I know nothing more repulsive in the art as a lady to see playing the violin. A politicizing lady is unpleasant, a smoking woman even more uncomfortable, but a lady playing a violin is the absurdity in the superlative. Beautiful white shoulders, a beautiful breast and a violin on it. What a caricature. And I would not recommend the violin to the ladies. The flesh of the lower jaw is squeezed up improperly. The arms are almost always crossed in angles. And although the breast is not crushed, so it is feared for this most vulnerable part of the woman. The last two reviews reveal the explicit policing of women's bodies, what is admirable and acceptable for objectified female body within the male gaze. Such notions of delicate beauty contrast the laborious working demands of lower class women. In commissioning works that feature both these feminine musical instruments and domestic tools, I explore the oppression of women across class differences.
So we're not really used to thinking of instruments as a technology, but if we think about the piano, Joselyn's main instrument, this is a tremendous feat of engineering. It went through many prototypes, from the harpsichord to the forte piano. It's very dependent on the technology of the time. So the difference between the forte piano that we know of, the old forte piano, and the piano that we know of today is that there was a difference in metallurgy for the soundboard and also the strings. It's driven by advancements in other fields. So architecture, they were able to make larger rooms, and they needed instruments that could then fill those rooms. And this is really detailed in Emily Thompson's wonderful book, The Soundscape of Modernity. And they're also completely regulated, so we don't have ivory keys on pianos anymore. The sort of field that we're in is called these new interfaces for musical expressions. Some people refer to this as new instruments for musical expression. Some people found the word instrument too limiting, so they like the word interfaces. This grew out of a 2001 panel at the Computer Human Interaction, or CHI conference, if you're familiar with that. And this is an incredibly male-dominated field, and if you read our paper, you can see some of those references. The NIME conference is an annual event with performances and presentations encompassing design and performance experience reports, mapping sensors and actuators to real-time computer processes with sonic and haptic output. There are instruments that are designed from novices to virtuosic performer, and I think that we're trying to create an instrument that is capable of expressing both. So the installation is for the novice, and the performance is for the virtuosic. And also perceptual, cognitive, and pedagogical issues in the design of musical controllers, as well as the artistic, cultural, and social impact of new performance instruments. So Jaime de la Rosa Oliver says that the disassociation of power, effort, interface, sound, and gesture is vital to experimental instruments. It liberates mechanical action sound pairings to make way for unexpected new configurations. So if we were limited to producing acoustic sound with the ironing and the ironing board, we would be much more limited in what kind of sonic result we could have. Something that I'm very interested in is embodied cognition, and particularly material engagement theory. So with embodied cognition, we sort of realize that our cognition is not simply our brain. It is influenced by our body and even by our surroundings. Material engagement theory goes even further and sort of says that our tools themselves impact our cognition. And there's a lovely book called How Things Shape the Mind. And in this, Lambrois says, and he says tools, and I'm sort of saying instruments, can be seen as a prototypical exemplar of material engagement that provide a unique way of understanding how mental events relate to matter and project to the world.
So our first instrument is the embedded iron. This iron is designed in the scheme of embedded acoustic instruments. In that, embedded means that all the components necessary for the instrument, the sensors for the interface, the amplifiers and speakers for the sound generation, and the link between all the code that maps these interfaces to the resulting sound, are all integrated into the design of the instrument. The acoustic traits of this mean that the body of the instrument is important in the final design. It doesn't use line outs to the house sound. It uses the materials of the instrument as a key ingredient to the final resulting sound. And if you needed to amplify these in a larger hall, you would do it as you would a traditional instrument. Rather than having a line out to a mixing board, you would just put some microphones on stage and capture the electronic sound as it resonates through the material that they're mounted to. The fabrication process for this, we started off with a antique charcoal iron. We felt that it would be a great tool for this particular instrument because we would be able to put all of the components inside it. But it turned out that the iron was about half an inch thick of cast iron, so it was very heavy, and the internal volume was not as large as we needed. So we decided to go with a 3D printed iron so that we could have some customization to the interior space. And it also meant we didn't have to drill through cast iron and add all the sensors to that, which could be quite a headache. And this doing a printed model also allows us to relatively easily and quickly create variations to the design to experiment and prototype with and find the best design for what we need. For this particular instrument, the interaction includes pressure sensors, contact microphones, and camera tracking, which is currently broken. That's our next objective, is to get that working. The 3 pressure sensors are in the corners of the iron, and it allows us to detect the overall downward force being applied to it, as well as calculate rocking and tilting of the iron. The piezo discs listen to how the body resonates as it goes over various fabrics, which will allow us to detect the differences in the topology of the fabric, and through machine learning with the Wekinator, we are able to identify those fabrics and map that to different sound designs. And then the camera tracking will be able to determine the position, the XY position along the board, as well as the rotation of the iron relative to the ironing board. The sound generation is all embedded into the ironing board. It is our primary resonating body. It has the amplifiers, the speakers, the transducers, the batteries, everything are mounted to the bottom. And we are able to get some color variation by crossfading between the transducers and the speakers. As far as the computation, we went with a Raspberry Pi because it's relatively easy to work with and quite affordable. And we use multiple programming languages to transmit and map the sensor data to pure data, which is our sound programming. It's our synthesizer. We use Python, Arduino, Bash scripting, and the Wekinator platform to send the sensors to pure data. And then all of that is mapped and generates the sound within PD. This is the Raspberry Pi. And then this is the logo for Wekinator, both of which are open source and freely, not freely, but easily available to anybody who is interested. Currently, the pressure sensors detect tilt, the tilt, the rocking, and the downward force, which is mapped to the selection between transducer and driver, the waveform between sawtooth and sine wave, and the overall gain of the instrument being sent to the amplifiers. The fabric detection controls harmonic ratios, so it goes from whole number ratios like you might expect in a string to Fibonacci ratios, which I don't think there's anything in nature that has Fibonacci ratios. And then the camera tracking controls the fundamental frequency, amplitude modulation parameters, and the stereo panning of the instrument. That's where we are so far.
Women's Labor imagines domestic tools. Domestic tools and the new instruments for musical expression as a site of social, cultural, and sonic change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have heard a lot about interface design and interface cultures is the program that Christa and Laurent actually lead at the University of Linz. So now we go forward to your slide. Welcome, Christa and Laurent, please.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for inviting us here. It's a real pleasure to be back here so soon. Actually, we have been here just 1 year ago for a laser talk. And yeah, congratulations to the lecture before. That was fantastic. And some of our collaborators at the University of Art in Linz, where we are currently, are working also in this NIME community. So I think there's a lot of really very interesting overlap. However, we are not going to talk so much about the university today, but about our current retrospective show at the Biel Art Center. And we are very happy that David Vermillion invited us to do this really fantastic, we hope, a fantastic exhibition, self-promotion, at the Biel Center, and we're very proud of it. So thanks again, David, for inviting us there. And we want to take this opportunity to just give you some impressions here and to really motivate you to come to Irvine. I know it's 40 kilometers, but that's actually, I think, for American standard, very nearby, isn't it? So please come and see it. It's open until May 25th. So David, I quote David here, he writes that the Biel Center is proud to show our retrospective. And it's actually almost 30 years that we are working in this field. So yeah, time flies and we are getting older. We started in 1992. Mostly maybe I should tell many people know us, but our background, my background is botany and anthropology and later sculpture and media art. And Laurent's background is?
Started with electronic and programming as a kid and continued as a musician, experimenting with electronic on stage. So basically trying to interact with the early computers in the 80s, but it was a good learning process for me. And then I did some art study after that. So
And so I show you some examples of projects that we did. Actually, the first project will be shown here, or is shown at the Bill Center. It's a combination of plants and interfaces, so I think we have a very nice overlap to the previous talk. And we work often in this area of artificial life and artificial intelligence, but also very much on interactivity. So almost all of the projects that we've done so far are interactive installations where we want to get people or the audiences involved in the making of the project, and a bit similar to the project we saw before, really design interfaces that help people in a very intuitive way to interact with our artwork. So that's the Bill Art Center, if you don't know it. It's in the middle of the campus at UC Irvine. And we show 8 projects there. Seven of them are interactive. And I just show you a few impressions. So that's the exhibition overview. What you see here in the middle is, wait, do we have a cursor? Not sure. Okay, there's a laser. Does it work? So you see this table in the middle with a kind of conspicuous interface, a very old typewriter, and we have also Erkki Hutamo with us here, who is a specialist on media archaeology. So I think this is a media archaeological interface. It's an old typewriter where people can type text, and then the text transforms into little animals that live on the paper, and you can sort of interact with this these forms. What you see here in the background are images of famous media protagonists, mostly curators, but also artists. Maybe you recognize Peter Weibel here on the left side. Then the next person is Jeffrey Shaw. Then we have Lynn, fantastic media artist and contemporary artist here from the States, and Christiane Paul, a curator from New York. And those two telephones that you see here, they are actually also media archaeological interfaces that you can use, and I will speak about this in a minute. So this was the first project we did in 1992, so like really, really long time ago. And when you look at the image, it looks like a moss. And when people touch these plants, they start to grow artificial plants on the screen. And the way, maybe Laurent, you can explain how this works, or how you did this type of interfaces.
Right, the interface is based on amplifiers, so it's an electrical field amplifier. That means that it's capturing the field that the plant is sensing around the plant. So it's your field, it's your electrical field. Everyone is carrying some electricity in your body. We are like living batteries. Basically, we transmit this information to the plant. And I'm getting this information from the root of the plant and translate it to digital data to the software. And the software is capturing this information and grow similar plants on the screen. So the plants are mathematically calculated, and it's basically an addition of trajectory on the screen. So the picture is quite complex for the time where we have been doing this. It's a mix between a still image and an animation, so basically it's sort of a trick. But so we dedicated one plant to do that. It's the cactus. That's the one that doesn't want to be touched. The cactus on the side here erases the picture if you insist with your hands.
But there's enough on there. There's enough on there to erase it.
And so yeah, this was our first installation in '92, and it's I think also a combination of our background, botany, then also interactivity, a bit of a performative. I mean, not like performance, but more like this element of people performing with the artwork. And I like your expression before, installation performance. How did you call it?
Installformances.
Installformances. I think that's a really, really interesting term. I never heard this before.
I made it up.
You made it. That's, yeah.
I also liked performalations, but I felt that sounded very dirty.
Okay, we should talk. But this was really kind of also for us a motivation, an installation that's like an object, art object, but only starts living when people interact with it. Here's a newer work from 2015, which has also this performative element. People stand in front of a screen, and here it's not so visible, but the screen is consisting of 10,000 little flies, looks like really like flies, and when people put themselves in front of the screen, the flies start to create the image of a person. So you feel like it's yourself, but then at the same time it disappears very quickly. And I think David has seen this also in the documentation and tells us that it's really totally different if you experience it than seeing it just on the screen. So please come and try that out yourself as well.
It really is different.
So here's some exhibition shots from the opening. Then here we see David trying out the live writer. I really like that image, David. This is really cool. And so what you do here, you can of course type with one finger at a time, or you'll be a professional typist. And what happens here is you start to see little spiders on the screen that develop depending on what you write, and it's the genetic code. The text is the genetic code that creates the little spiders. And they start to live on the paper, interact, evolve, and you can also kill them if you want. Some important also to make sure that you can show these pieces hopefully in 20, 30 years from now, or even longer as well. Some more impressions. And of course, you know, these kind of interfaces, maybe Erki can tell much more about this, being so obsolete, they are very fascinating for people because they are like very interesting looking, and very few people actually still know how to use these machines. Some people don't even know you have to press the button hard, or how to
The return.
the return, yes, I think is also something that many people don't know.
Mechanical typewriter is undergoing a comeback now.
Yeah.
Young people are actually interested in buying mechanical typewriters and starting using them. It's
What about the rotary phone? Is that coming back?
Yeah,
Ah!
actually. Yeah. Yeah, so
Everyone has
that's
landlines, that's the
rotary
hit the
phone. This
rotary
is a
on
very
your
nice
cell phone.
bakelit telephone, like bakelit, feels really good.
It's virtual.
But you have to turn the handle, and then we don't see it that well here, but when this phone calls that phone, then you get smoke coming out of this phone. So you're communicating via smoke, and I think there's also a very interesting, you know, history about how maybe the Indians started or communicated via smoke signals. Oh, we have a cowboy here, so so I think that's very interesting too. So again, here this idea of taking existing interfaces or tools for communication and turn them into a sort of slightly bizarre, maybe a bit surrealistic communication device. Then this is a new project called Fly Simulator. Please notice the carpet. We had it made extra for Ars Electronica this year also, no, last year. And what happens here is when you put on this VR helmet, you see a lot of flies in the sky. And Erki, you have seen the version, the big version at Scuba University. And so it's a bit similar. You are flying in the sky, and there are lots of clouds as well. So it's a little bit, some people get a bit dizzy. And
It's not easy to be a fly.
they are showing in Tsukuba in Japan an enormous virtual reality installation, which is basically projecting a kind of a seamless space in a huge hall, and when you wear 3D glasses and walk around, so you get these swarms of flies that look very large to come all around you, and you can actually kind of develop a kind of way of interacting with the swarms by running and kind of trying to escape and coming close. It's astonishing.
And
There's also sound.
sound, yes, there's also sound.
Sound of the swarms of the flies too.
And we were quite inspired by, you know, the famous Hitchcock movie, the birds, where this swarm of birds are coming. So we wanted to recreate somehow this fascinating but also scary feeling. So that happens here to some degree as well. Then this is also a newer work, NeuroMirror, where we worked also with some researchers from UCI, UC Davis, UCI, yes. So what happens here, this is an interactive installation with 3 screens. In the middle you see yourself in real time. So that's real time. That's a time delay of about 5 seconds. And here on the right side, you see actually our son, Leo, being turned into an avatar. And he's reacting to what the person interacting with the screen is doing with some machine learning algorithm, so he can detect what you're doing and react accordingly and change his behavior and also learn basically from this interaction. This is a work in progress, even though already it's part of the Itau Cultural collection. We're still actually working on it, and we got really good feedback from the researchers at UCI, and keep improving it. Let me see some. That's actually one of the PhD students from UCI interacting with the system, and then it's this kind of very strange water effect. So the image looks a bit distorted and dissolved, which we liked quite a bit. Then here you see the portraits. I told you, Peter Weibel, maybe for those who don't know, is a very important media artist and curator, and currently head of the ZKM Media Museum in Karlsruhe, a fantastic museum. Please go there, it's really absolutely super. Jeffrey Shaw, media artist, very famous media artist from Australia. Lynn Hirschman, I think I don't have to explain who Lynn Hirschman is. Christiane Paul. And we have a whole series. We have also Victoria and many other people in this series of fly portraits. Then here we have also plotter drawings. So this is Roy Ascott, David Vermillion and Erki Hutamo as plotter drawings, little flies. And so we also use the same software that is used for the interactive installation to create more traditional portraits as plotter drawings of flies. Yeah, that's sort of it. Here's some more impressions. And yes, we are very happy that we could talk here, and I think maybe we have time for some questions later.
Yes, that's the whole idea.
Okay, thank you.
So it's always amazing how things come together, because this was not planned, but the connections are so fantastic between the interface and the media archaeology and the old coming into the new. And also to say that there is nothing new. There's this always rush for new. So I would also like to thank Bess Rutschlisser for coming today. She's the director of the Berman Foundation that many of you have visited, where the kinetic collection of kinetic art is one of the best in the world as far as a private collection goes. We go there once a year, and I see how our students get shocked at how something was done in 1920 that maybe was analog, but really conceptually and aesthetically pretty much contemporary. So thank you for bringing in the old and the new, and now everybody can mingle and talk about it informally. Thank you.